The next day, one by one, the little warriors woke up as they immersed themselves in practicing the totemic power. After a night's practicing, most of them could skillfully use the totemic power in their bodies. Through that night, Xiaoxuan had also gained a lot. After getting familiar with how to use totemic power, he tried the same way to deal with that egg shrouding the totem. It turned out that the method worked. When using the totemic power, the shining light on that egg would fade slightly, while when using the power of the egg, the totem would be covered by the dazzling light of it totally. However, no matter which kind of power Xiaoxuan used, the totem was always being shrouded in the egg, and that was something that could not be changed. Even though he could not switch the powers in the blink of an eye, but at least with sufficient time, Xiaoxuan could use those two powers freely. As a result, when Xiaoxuan opened up his eyes again, he didn't see any more skeletons. Seeing the familiar world again made Xiaoxuan more than thrilled. It would have been so creepy if he could only see skeletons from now on. Luckily, he still got to see the varied, colorful world filled with life and vitality. Smoothing that major problem out, Xiaoxuan felt pretty relieved. Then, he saw some familiar faces, the kids from the orphan cave, Moer, Sai and some other kids that he had met before. It was good to see their facial expressions, for a vision filled with only skeletons was so dull and dreary. This time, Xiaoxuan finally could see Mao's glare. However, even though he could see that now, he ignored it after a single glance. Mao felt very angry for being ignored by Xiaoxuan like that. He wanted to have a nice chat with him, but then the shaman came inside, so Mao could only keep his hatred to himself, for no one dared to be presumptuous in front of the shaman. The shaman asked how they felt, and after he made sure there was nothing abnormal, he said that they will be excused to leave. As for the other things, they could only try to adjust themselves during later hunting missions. The master initiated the apprentices, but they could only sharpen their skills through their own efforts. Even if they had the same starting point, warriors from the same awakening year could be in totally different levels as time went by. No one could become a great warrior only by bragging. In fact, Xiaoxuan respected and admired the old shaman a lot. Even the kids living in the orphan cave, who had experienced starvation and coldness, and became ferocious, they never grumbled against heaven or laid the blame upon other people. They also had no twisted minds or thoughts. After awakening their totemic powers, they were great warriors with a positive attitude and hopes for a better future. The shaman had the credit for most of that. If we say that the chief managed the material life in the tribe, then the shaman would be in charge of the spiritual life in the tribe. The shaman's duty was heavy and important. Not far from the stone room, some people were waiting there for those newly awakened warriors. Among which Xiaoxuan noticed a familiar figure. Actually, it was hard not to notice him, for he seemed to stand out a lot with that giant boar head. That was the proud wimpy kid with the excessive boar head as his decoration. Mao also noticed him, and the anger in his face immediately faded away, as he walked towards that direction with a smile. "Have you become a totemic warrior, big brother?" the kid with that boar head asked. "Of course. Hey, look, who am I?" Mao looked even more proud. They turned out to be brothers. No wonder Xiaoxuan felt familiar when he saw Mao earlier. Those little warriors left one by one. Xiaoxuan intended to leave, but unexpectedly, he was stopped by the shaman. "Wait a second, Xuan." The shaman came towards him and passed him a pattern plate. "You did a good job keeping Caesar. In the future, you may approach me if you have any trouble." Early in the morning, the shaman had already asked about the recent situation of Caesar, and the general happenings and events of Xiaoxuan during the past year. In fact, the fish thing did not raise much attention in the mountaintop, and since the shaman had been working on the plant and herb, he did not pay much attention as well. Only this morning did he know a thing or two about people down the mountain. However, the shaman was much more interested in Caesar than in the fish. He knew that he was negligent, and he wanted to make amends since the kid had done such a good job keeping Caesar. Xiaoxuan had tied the previous pattern plate from the shaman around Caesar's neck, so this time the shaman gave Xiaoxuan another one. The shaman also promised to have some food delivered to Xiaoxuan once he had his own house built. Xiaoxuan did not decline his kindness, and he left after expressing his thanks. After Xiaoxuan had left, Chief Ao approached the shaman and showed him the burned palm of his, as he shared the story from last night. The shaman thought about it for some time. Suddenly he realized something, and he asked Ao to enter the room so they could be alone. "Your story actually reminded me of something. It said that the original flame would cause such circumstances," the shaman said slowly. "You are saying that?" Ao was very much astonished. Since the shaman mentioned the original flame being the chief of the tribe, Ao understood the meaning behind that phrase. Besides the first settlers who came here, only generations of chiefs and shamans knew that the flame in the tribe was incomplete. The so-called "the flame harmed no one" theory only meant that when the flying flames melted into one's body, it wouldn't harm them. However, for the others, it was different. After all, the source of power in everyone's body was the same, but the power itself varied from person to person. When being awakened, naturally the power would protect oneself and exclude the others. The flame's fire would not harm dead things, yet it would do a lot of damage to the living. Anyone other than the people in the tribe would get badly burnt by the fire. Ao was someone in the tribe, so normally speaking, the flame that awakened the source of power was the same. And since it was the tribe's flame, the rejection was not severe. What's more, Ao had a tough body in the first place, so he was lucky for only getting a red mark instead of being injured. Also, that night, those night swallows flying out there did not dare enter the residential area of the tribe. If they did, they would be severely injured, or even burned to death if they were touched by the spreading flame. Also, it was the reason why Ji suggested Xiao Xuan to leave Caesar in the cave instead of taking him up to the mountaintop. However, this fire, that protected your own but excluded the others, was not that obvious since it was incomplete. Then, when the flame is complete, will the awakening process be like Xuan's case and one's whole body becomes covered in fire? Ao was surprised. Highly likely, we shall keep this thing as a secret for now, and no other person shall know about it. Let's discuss this when I find some answers in the ancient animal skin rolls. The shaman said seriously. Ao nodded at his words, for he knew that it could not be resolved in a short period of time. And it didn't matter as long as it was not a bad thing. As for when the other people in the tribe would ask about it, Ao planned to tell them that it was only because Xiao Xuan was awakening his totemic power. Xiao Xuan, who was walking down the mountain, did not know that his way of awakening with the flame had something to do with the complete flame. And since the chief and the shaman both did not ask the details about last night, Xiao Xuan would definitely not tell the secret. Instead, he continued to play his role as a newly awakened boy. When he stretched his body, Xiao Xuan could hear the cracking of his bones. It was not the stiff sound made after a long time sitting. On the contrary, he felt the joy that his body was filled with strength and energy. The depression that had long existed in his heart for being in a complete alien world also faded away, and he felt that his steps got lighter as he walked. Standing on the mountaintop and looking afar at the vast mountains in the horizon, a sense of pride rose up in his chest. Since he could not go back to his world, he decided to live well in this world. Xiao Xuan swung his arms and quickened his steps. With one slight leap he covered a long distance. In the comfort of running, he experienced the joy and cheer that fully differed from yesterday. All said that after awakening the totemic power, one would run with the speed of a bird, and strike with the strength of a beast. It was not boasting at all. Even if Xiao Xuan could not do the same now, it was not impossible to achieve in the future. Even before Xiao Xuan went down the mountain, people in the Mountain Foot district were already discussing Xiao Xuan's awakening. No one expected that this young, weak little kid from the orphan cave would be able to awaken his totemic power yesterday. Since he awakened his totemic power at such a young age, people assumed him to be full of potential and that perhaps he would turn into a strong totemic warrior. Also, people were wondering why Xiao Xuan had awakened his totemic power so early. Some said that it was because Xiao Xuan went out to exercise every morning, just like kids up in the mountain, that he could awaken his totemic power so early. There were also some people that speculated it was because of the fish, because no other such thing had ever happened in the Mountain Foot district, so why now had Xiao Xuan existed as an exception? However, that theory got refuted as soon as it appeared. Their own kids had eaten plenty of fish since they began fishing themselves, and some of them were 1 year older than Xiao Xuan. If fish were the reason for his awakening, then why didn't they awaken their totemic power? So, in the end, people boiled down the reason of Xiao Xuan's early awakening to the fact that he went out to practice and exercise every morning. More and more people were convinced of that as time went by. Hence, when Xiao Xuan finally came down the mountain, he noticed that most of the kids who used to sleep all day were now being woken up by their parents and had to go out to help move stones or go fishing with them. Xiao Xuan only knew why after he asked someone. Surely, working was also one kind of practice and exercise. Xiao Xuan did not argue with the early practicing theory, as of course he wouldn't share the real reason with them. Children in the cave did not go out fishing today. With Xiao Xuan's absence, Caesar refused to work and dig up stoneworms anymore. Even if they had the fishing tools, they could not capture any fish without the bait. There were too many people in the gravel yard, so the kids couldn't dig up stoneworms for they would constantly be crowded out. Caesar, on the other hand, never moved his ass from the entrance of the cave. He just squatted there, ignoring all the kids' persuasion. Even when some kid reluctantly gave him half of a raw fish, he did not look at it and instead kept staring at the mountaintop. Upon seeing Xiao Xuan return, Caesar was immediately elated and rushed toward Xiao Xuan at the first sight of him. If Xiao Xuan had not awakened the totemic power and become much stronger, he perhaps would literally have been pinned down by Caesar. All the kids in the cave were counting on his return, so Xiao Xuan took Caesar to the gravel yard and they dug out many stone worms. After a winter's hibernation, almost all the stone worms returned to the surface of the ground, resulting in a big harvest. Since he had awakened his totemic power, Xiao Xuan would go on hunting missions with his new team, making it impossible for him to be in charge of the orphan cave. After discussing with Ji, Xiao Xuan left Tu and Ba to manage the cave together. Tu could count well, and his memorization ability was also outstanding. He was much more brave now and he could talk fluently. The only weakness about him was that he still seemed weak and slim. Ba, on the other hand, was not outstanding in all those aspects, but his figure was strong enough. No one would be his rival once he got seriously angry. So it was reasonable that these two guys were in charge together. After handling the stuff in the cave, Xiao Xuan saw Leng Ga approach with a bright smile. "Good lad. You impressed us all for awakening so early. I thought you'd have to wait for another 2 years or more." Leng Ga was quite thrilled. Xiao Xuan had asked Leng Ga before about whether he could join their hunting team after he awakened his totemic power, back in the days when they were chatting. Mai did not refuse Xiao Xuan then, and in fact Mai had helped Xiao Xuan after that, so it seemed that Mai was also optimistic about Xiao Xuan. At first, when they attended the ritual ceremony, they felt it was a shame that Xiao Xuan was still too young. However, no one expected that Xiao Xuan would give them such a big surprise last night. Becoming a totemic warrior meant that he could own his own independent house, and Leng Ga was just here to help him with that. Leng Ga and a few warriors from the same hunting team were having a barbecue party together, and were discussing the first upcoming hunting mission of the year. When Leng Ga heard Xiao Xuan had left the shaman's place, he came to find him and drag him to their house to meet his future teammates. There were 6 people in Leng Ga's wooden house. They were all very young, and one of them had only awakened last year. However, he was already 13 years old when he had awakened and he had grown a lot over the last year, so he now seemed much bigger than Xiao Xuan in size. Knowing that these people would be his future teammates, Xiao Xuan also greeted them warmly with enthusiasm. "Don't worry about the house. We will cut some wood and help you build it the first thing tomorrow," the young man named Ang told Xiao Xuan. At first, Xiao Xuan assumed that he could only have his own independent house after 2 or 3 years. However, he unexpectedly could have it in such a short time. Normally, people like Sai, who had their own families, would stay with their family even after they had awakened. However, for someone like Xiao Xuan, who came from the orphan cave, they basically had to ask their friends to help build a house. Since he was already here, Leng Ga did not plan to let Xiao Xuan leave quite so soon, and instead wanted to keep Xiao Xuan here at their barbecue party. Since the whole winter had passed, the meat they preserved was not fresh anymore even though Leng Ga and his friends preferred fresh meat. It didn't matter anyway, as they would have their first hunting trip of the year very soon. So several people brought the meat they still had in their homes, with the thought that they would get more fresh meat after they had eaten up the old. As they were eating and chatting, Aang suddenly mentioned the widespread word in the tribe, potlatch. That was only a legend. It said that there was someone in the tribe that once held a potlatch. A potlatch was a feast that was considered the winner of a contest between hosts to see who could feed their invited guests the most. As for the definition of most, there lay the interesting part. They had to feed the guests until they got so full that they would wobble over the grass and vomit somewhere. After they threw up all the food in their bellies, guests would return to the feast and continue to eat until they felt like they could throw up again, at least a few times. Only then could the feast be considered as a successful one. That kind of feast was the so-called potlatch. So based on Leng Ga's description, Xiao Xuan knew that the potlatch aimed at giving out or even destroying more food and property than one's competitors. Some people would even destroy their food and clothes in front of the public, and sometimes they would even burn their houses down to the ground to build up their prestige in the tribe and humiliate their competitors. One who did that would gain the long-term admiration from his followers. Whoever was able to do that would be someone with considerable power and status, who was ambitious in seizing even higher power. That was arrogant enough, conceited enough, and idiotic enough. Then Xiao Xuan noticed Leng Ga and his friends' facial expressions when they talked about the potlatch. There was a kind of undisguised admiration. As if they wanted to kneel before the host of a potlatch if ever he showed his face here. Seeing Xiao Xuan's astonishment, Leng Ga acted like an elder and claimed that, "You don't understand it yet." Yes, Xiao Xuan did not understand it. In his eyes, only a total moron would do such deeds, and how could he be admired and respected by warriors like Leng Ga? No, it should be said that all people in the tribe admired such deeds deeply. Thinking that in his previous life, people would only feel honored if there were leftovers when they treated their guests, Xiaoxuan finally began to understand a little. As it turned out that the tradition came from the earliest generations of men. However, that was such severe waste of things. He had underestimated the obsession that people here had towards food. They had such unique pursuit of the concept of food. In the past, Xiaoxuan had heard a lot of discussions between the kids in the cave about which warrior had defeated what kind of ferocious beast. Those heroes were worshipped a lot in the past, and their glorious deeds were remembered and passed on to the new generations. However, now Xiaoxuan was informed that there was another even more glorious deed. Originally, to get followers, one did not need to beat up people, use lies, no need to lobby, or persuade, or sweeten the deal. And all plans to outwit someone were unnecessary. All that needed to be done was to host a potlatch, and then numerous people would want to become your followers. Xiaoxuan felt that his values of life had been distorted. Looking up at those two crescent moons in the sky, Xiaoxuan sighed, I shall be a moron someday in the future. What did you say? Leng Ga did not understand Xiaoxuan's meaning. Nothing. I said that, if possible, one day we shall host a potlatch ourselves. Xiaoxuan said. Leng Ga and his companions laughed out, and Leng Ga, having the most laughter, tapped on Xiaoxuan's shoulder. After he stopped laughing, he even praised Xiaoxuan, that's the spirit. In the eyes of Leng Ga and Mai, what Xiaoxuan just said was merely some childish talk after hearing a legend, and they did not consider it seriously. After all, they had never seen a potlatch held during their lifetime. Neither had their parents or their grandparents. None of them had seen a real one. Was the legend true or not? Even the shaman and the chief could not tell. Perhaps Leng Ga felt that it was not appropriate to keep on discussing the potlatch, and he changed the subject, for he wanted to show off more in front of Xiaoxuan. You know, what is the most intimate partner of ours since we were born? Asked Leng Ga. Xiaoxuan sat still, looked down, and thought about it for a bit. Then he raised his head, and stared at Leng Ga meaningfully as he said tentatively, our left hand. Leng Ga was speechless. Leng Ga choked. At first Leng Ga had guessed a few possible answers that Xiaoxuan might come up with, and he planned to judge and guide him in detail no matter which answer he had. Just the same as every time in the past when there was someone newly joined the hunting team. However, Leng Ga did not expect Xiaoxuan to have such an implausible answer and to go way off script. What did one's left hand have anything to do with it? But Leng Ga did not overthink it, instead, he just corrected it with a serious face, it's stone. You should know that a long time ago, when we first started a life here, we were just living in the cave. Stone was something that we saw and touched every day. It could keep us sheltered, and help us to cut and chop wood. As he spoke, Leng Ga's face turned even more serious, and he seemed quite emotional with his fists clenched. In the meantime, we also used those stones. We could pierce those ferocious beasts through with stones, and smash their heads with stones. Even when we were in danger, stones would also be the thing that accompanied us by our side, until our last breath. Providing shelter, accompanying by one side, never to betray nor to abandon. People in the tribe had been dealing with stones from their births. They played with stones and used stones in their daily life. Almost all tools and appliances were made from stones. As for warriors who often went out for hunting missions, they could not be more familiar with stones, and they could never be separated from stoneware. So no wonder Leng Ga said all that. Certainly, Xiaoxuan preferred to call the stones as tools, after all stones had no life. Now, you know what is supposed to be our most intimate partner, right? Leng Ga stared at Xiaoxuan and asked again. His expression indicated that this time he would not accept any wrong answer. Xiaoxuan nodded pretty seriously and earnestly, it's stone. Ha, you got it right this time. Leng Ga showed a satisfied smile immediately, and then continued on the topic of hunting. Oh, Xuan, now since you just got awakened this year, you are not allowed to participate in the first hunting mission of this year. Perhaps you would also miss the second one as well. As for the third hunting mission, you are the only one who could decide whether you could join us or not. It's all up to your ability, said Leng Ga. Was there such a thing? Xiaoxuan was not aware of that. Seeing Xiaoxuan's curiosity, Leng Ga explained, you just awakened, so you and the other newly awakened totemic warriors may be rough in using your powers and strength. You have to go through some training first. Leng Ga even put it mildly, but Xiaoxuan could speculate the reason hidden in his words. One reason for keeping those newly awakened kids from hunting missions was for safety concern. When spring finally came with blossoms and warmth after a whole winter, a lot of ferocious beasts became active again in the mountains and almost all of them were starved. There would be more poisonous snakes wandering around and the forest would be filled with different kinds of crisis. With no protection along the way, newly awakened kids would easily get killed in the mountain forests. No one in the tribe would like to see that happen. However, the second reason was because the newly awakened warriors like Xiaoxuan had not achieved some certain level of ability. Hunting teams valued team working a lot. Therefore, someone with no guaranteed personal abilities would be a heavy liability to the team, who could bring no help but instead appear to be a burden. Understood. Xiaoxuan did not feel disappointed when he had thought things through. Also, he felt that he should have his foundation properly built first. It's not a bad thing that he could have the time to practice more. Leng Ga was relieved with Xiaoxuan's reaction. Originally he thought that Xiaoxuan might be disappointed or reluctant as the other kids, and he did not expect him to have cleared the dots so soon. When he asked Xiaoxuan to come to the party and meet his future teammates, he also planned to tell Xiaoxuan about the first 2 hunting missions. In the past, many newly awakened warriors would make a scene when they were told that they were not allowed to join the first 2 hunting missions after they had become fully excited about the hunting. When those circumstances happened, in most cases, the kids' parents would discipline them with a few slaps on the face. After that, they would behave much better. However, Xiaoxuan came from orphan cave and both his parents had died long before. What's more, he appeared to be much more emaciated than the other kids, so Leng Ga was worried that perhaps he would hurt him if he had to give Xiaoxuan a few slaps. Good. I'm glad that you can think it through. By the way, I have a few fine stone cores here. I'll give them to you, you may craft them yourself, or just go and find a stoneware crafter. Leng Ga took out a few stones in different sizes from his animal skin bag. Those were the stone cores that Leng Ga mentioned earlier. The materials to make stoneware could be obtained after hitting and forging the stones, and people in the tribe would call those stone cores. After giving the stone cores to Xiaoxuan, Leng Ga shared some training experiences with him as well. The others at the party did not hold back their experiences either. They did not have that kind of thought in their minds. Xiaoxuan kept their advices in mind silently, and then sincerely thanked them for the sharing. Your father used to help me when he was alive. Leng Ga said. People in hunting teams were just like that, each of them was willing to lend a hand to others when possible. Even though they could not help Xiaoxuan a lot on his training, their advices could make it easier anyway. After having some grilled meat, Xiaoxuan excused himself from the party. He had other things that needed to be done. While Leng Ga and the others kept on discussing about the coming hunting mission in 5 days. Xiaoxuan was called to stop, not long after he had come out from Leng Ga's house. Are you Xuan? Xiaoxuan looked at the voice's direction and saw a kid older than himself. He looked the same age as Sai, but much stronger. The animal skin clothes on him seemed to be of good quality. Xiaoxuan assumed that he wasn't someone from the Mountain Foot district. Instead, he seemed more like someone living in the mountainside or mountaintop district. Xiaoxuan had some memory of him. They were awakened at the same ritual ceremony, but Xiaoxuan did not know his name yet. At the same time, the kid raised his head high and seemed pretty proud, and he was measuring Xiaoxuan with his eyes. Standing on a high ground and keeping his chin up, didn't his eyes feel tired? Xiaoxuan glimpsed at him and asked, "Who are you?" At first, Xiaoxuan thought that he would stand on his dignity and answer with something like "It doesn't matter who I am" to keep the appearances. However, the kid answered directly, "My name is Fei. After 5 days, I will be joining the hunting team to attend the first mission of this year. I bet you still have to wait for a long time before you can tag along, right?" After his declaration, he sneered at Xiaoxuan and then jumped up high above Xiaoxuan's head. When he landed with his tiptoes, he soon jumped up again. After a few leaps, he had already placed himself in front of Leng Ga's door. Apparently he had something to discuss with Leng Ga. The kid also snorted at Xiaoxuan as he looked back when he was about to enter the room, displaying his pride of his moves. His moves earlier were quite impressive among his peers. His father often complimented him for being able to run faster, jump higher and leap further than the other kids. Xiaoxuan scratched his jaw. Was it really okay for him to tag along with the hunting team, since he made such a big noise when landing? However, since Fate could come with the hunting team for the first hunting mission of the year, obviously he was under someone's protection. What's more, his protector must be someone with a high reputation and status, because some normal warriors like Leng Ga could never have a saying in this kind of things. Surely he was spoiled, with all the protection he got. However, Xiaoxuan was not affected by that, and his emotion were also not affected by Fai's attitude. After all, he was not really a little kid, and he understood the importance of gradual progress. Therefore, he was not that eager to succeed. The earlier incident might be influence others, but Xiaoxuan did not care that much. Xiaoxuan took Caesar for fishing. After an entire winter's rest, the fish in the river were still as stupid and dumb as earlier. They did not release once they took the bait, and so they got captured easily. They might look ferocious, but they were not intelligent at all. From Lang Ga and the other warriors' earlier discussion over hunting skills, Xiao Xuan learned that many beasts in the forests were just like the piranhas in the river. They might look ferocious, with sharp teeth and big mouth. But once you found the trick, they could be captured easily. However, some other animals might seem to be gentle and weak. They dieted on plants and had no sharp teeth. But instead, they could easily kill you in silence, and they were no less aggressive than many predators. Since it's not the world that Xiao Xuan was familiar with, he thought that he should get as much preparations as he could get. With the fish and some pieces of old animal skins, Xiao Xuan asked someone to help him make an animal skin bag. He paid the manual fee with one fish and then went to the stoneware crafter, Key's place with the other 3 fish. Now Xiao Xuan had more strength than before, so he could easily lift 4 big fish without Caesar's help. When Xiao Xuan arrived, some men were just leaving Key's house with finished stoneware in their hands, for example, stone knives, spearheads and stone adzes. Those people were here to trade stoneware, since the hunting season had begun, and they had to store more tools for hunting missions. Kay was considered as a famous stoneware crafter among the Mountain Foot district. Naturally more people tended to come to his place. If Kay had a better temper, he would for sure have gained more customers than now. Every year, Kay would drive away some people who wanted to do the trading with him just because of his bad temper. Some people said that Kay was behaving too straightforward. Instead of keeping it gentle, he tended to blast things outright in others' faces as he talked. However, Xiao Xuan did not agree with that. Was Kay really that ignorant of things? Or did he have a straightforward character? He didn't think so. Xiao Xuan lifted the curtain and walked inside after he got Key's permission. Kay was working on a stoneware. Most of the stoneware he made during winter had been traded out, and there were still some stone cores and food piled up in his room. They were the processing fee that he did not have the time to put away. Placing the fish by the pile of food, Xiao Xuan approached Kay. Uncle Kay, I want to learn how to craft stoneware. Last time when Xiao Xuan was here to learn, Kay refused him because he said it was not the right time yet and he had to wait until his totemic power awakened. Now since Xiao Xuan was awakened, he decided to have another shot at this. Also, according to Lang Ga and the others' advice and training, he needed a lot of stone tools. Xiao Xuan did not have enough food to trade for so much stoneware, so he planned to craft them by himself. Kay stopped his work at hand and measured Xiao Xuan closely from head to toes. And then he gazed straight at Xiao Xuan's eyes. Xiao Xuan did not avoid his eyesight. After a few seconds, Kay passed Xiao Xuan a stone hammer and pointed to somewhere not far, where a stone core was placed. On that stone core there were a few lines, curved and meandering. Hit along the lines, Kay said. As a rookie, Xiao Xuan held the stone hammer. He looked at Kay and then glimpsed at the stone core placed there, before he swung the hammer and hit down. The first strike was too cautious. He did hit the lines, but because of limited strength, it only left a slight dent on the stone core. Again. For the second strike, he hit it too hard, so he pierced down a stone chip instead of a flake of stone. Also, it went beyond the line. Xiao Xuan could tell from Kay's exposed veins by his forehead that Kay was extremely unsatisfied with his earlier 2 strikes. But since Kay kept his silence, Xiao Xuan continued hitting on the stone core along the lines. Also, he struck boldly, and he did not become timid because of the first 2 failures. Peeling down certain amount of stone flakes from a stone core was not as easy as it seemed to be. Stoneware crafters needed to estimate the length of time when the hammer should hit the stone based on different materials when he made the stoneware. Also, the angle and speed were also very important. Should the hit be straight or curved? What's the hammer's quality and the stones? How much strength should be used? There were many aspects that needed to be given serious consideration before one strikes the stone core. Kay had mentioned these all to Xiao Xuan, and Xiao Xuan had seen a lot when Kay was peeling stone flakes from the stone cores. However, when he got to do it himself, he knew that it was extremely difficult. A small discrepancy could lead to a major error. Again. As Xiao Xuan hit the stone core one strike after another, Kay sat aside and watched him in silence. Caesar was squatting beside Xiao Xuan. He looked up at Xiao Xuan and then looked at Kay and his poker face. Finally, Caesar decided to move his legs, one bit after another, until he had drawn back to the corner and then he lied down to stay with the fish. At first, Xiao Xuan would check on Key's reaction every time when he hit the stone. But after some time, he completely ignored Key's gaze and immersed himself into hitting and carving. The process of hitting was very labor-intensive, both physically and mentally. It was not as easy as a swing of a hand and an arm. For every single strike, he had to calculate a lot regarding the angle and strength. Things like how to swing the hammer and where should the hammer land needed to be decided in the blink of an eye. For many people in the tribe, perhaps after they gained enough experience in hitting the stones, they could achieve the best result based on their feelings. However, since Xiaoxuan was still merely a novice, it was impossible for him to have the experience that old stoneware crafters gained from hitting for dozens of years. He could only rely on the calculation and estimation he had in mind, and then try his best to better and improve his striking. Even though he now had a much stronger body with greater strength, the strength he had was not inexhaustible. At the beginning, he did not find it hard to hold the stone hammer. However, with more and more strikes, fatigue piled up. He felt that the hammer in his hand became increasingly heavy. However, at that time, every single strike became essential. At this point, hitting the stone core with the wrong strength or angle, the stone flakes and chips could be more or less than expected, therefore it could create more wasted materials than before. Because of this, Xiaoxuan did not have the energy and spirit to pay attention to Qi's reactions. At first, Xiaoxuan would hesitate for a few seconds between each two strikes because Xiaoxuan needed time to think about the disadvantages of his former strike so that he could better his next strike. However, with more and more practice, Xiaoxuan felt something in his mind and he became much more skilled on hitting. Therefore, the time between strikes was shortened. He did not know how many strikes he had made, but Xiaoxuan felt that he was on the verge of collapsing. However, Kei did not allow him to stop. Instead, he would point out the mistakes that he did during his hitting. It was just like when someone was running the marathon, the runner was about to collapse and wanted to stop for a rest, but someone from the back would urge him on to continue. Knowing Qi's temper, Xiaoxuan was fully aware that if he stopped now, he will not be able to learn the stone crafting skills from Kei in the future. So, regardless of how tired he was, he had to pull it together and continue. When he felt that the last trace of strength in his body got pulled out, he suddenly felt relaxed and alleviated as he kept on striking. He thought perhaps it was the feeling of breaking through your limits. What Xiaoxuan did not know was that when he felt relaxed and refueled with power, totemic patterns had showed up on his face. Without notice, he had used his totemic power. However, since all his attention was fixed on striking, he did not have extra attention to mind the totem lighting up in his mind. Traces of surprise showed up in Qi's eyes as he was sitting aside. Among all those years after he had become a stoneware crafter, many people had come to him to learn stone crafting skills. However, very few of them would use totemic power in the process of crafting. Some people thought that totemic power was sacred, which could only be used in sacred things like hunting missions or when defending the tribe, and other more sacred things. Even though some people did not have such opinions, it was very difficult for them to control totemic power so precisely. Only experienced warriors were able to do that. However, for kids at Xiaoxuan's age, or young warriors like Lenga, very few of them could control their totemic power at such a level. Once they used their totemic power, it was more likely for them to smash the stone core into pieces, which is more destruction than processing. Some guys who were impatient and hot-tempered would just quit. That was so seeking strenuous. I could have used that time for practicing hunting skills. Just because of that, Kei was quite astonished because Xiaoxuan did not only use totemic power and not destroy the stone core directly, the stone flakes he peeled off were even in better shapes and condition. Almost every stone flake he peeled away could be processed further into something else, instead of becoming waste stone materials. This was quite rare. However, Xiaoxuan was not aware of his rareness. Instead, he was immersed into striking. All he had in mind was the experience he gained from each strike, and then he focused on his next move, so that he missed the astonished expression on Qi's face that lasted for a few minutes. Normally, Kei had no expressions on his face. Even in front of some old friends, he would not express such astonishment when talking with them. It was quite rare for him to show that look. Xiaoxuan only stopped after he had finished hitting the stone core on all the lines. Glimpsing at the ground around the stone core, Xiaoxuan noticed that stone flakes had piled up beside, and some of them were just lying on the ground here and there. Then he looked at Kei, but Kei still had no expression on his face. Xiaoxuan dropped the stone hammer as he breathed heavily by the side. He waited for Qi's command and at the same time, he thought that it was really difficult to be a stoneware crafter. No wonder that only a small part of wounded totemic warriors would become stoneware crafters, even when they could not go hunting anymore. Others who crafted stoneware were only doing it for their own use, or for their kids' practice. Aside from that, they would do other things in their daily life. For example, Ji was in charge of food delivery to the orphan cave. So they would not treat stone crafting as a profession that they could earn a living from. Therefore, their crafting skills were absolutely not as good as professional stoneware crafters as Kei. Kay had already calmed himself down and hid his astonished look. He looked just as he usually does, and he was sitting at the same place where he was from the very beginning. But he took a long thin wood stick and began to dig into the pile of stone flakes and chips. His hand flicked slightly and the end of the stick picked out a sharp-pointed stone flake. The sharp-pointed stone flake got lifted up, and after it drew a parabola in the air, it fell into a wooden box filled with many stone flakes that waited to be further processed. The stone flakes and chips that got peeled away could be made into different kinds of stoneware like scrapers, cones, or arrowheads based on their different shapes. Even though there were a lot of stone flakes and chips that got peeled away from the stone core, Kay was pretty fast in picking them out and throwing them into the box. Xiaoxuan stared at those stone flakes flying from the ground into the stone box like beads. He was dazzled. Before Xiaoxuan could take a few long breaths, Kay had finished picking. After dropping the wood stick, Kay said with no facial expression, "Waste." Xiaoxuan's eyelid twitched as he heard him, but he soon realized that the waste was not referring to him, but the stones on the ground which could not be further processed. Those were considered as waste materials. Obviously, Kay was not satisfied with the quantity of the waste stone flakes that Xiaoxuan created. "I planned to make a stone ball. But judging from it, now it could only be made into a stone adze." Kay looked at the stone core that was peeled in despise, and this time he said a long sentence. Xiaoxuan felt relieved. At first he was worried that perhaps Kay would not take him in as an apprentice. But since Kay said that, it meant that Kay did not mind teaching him. "Bring it over here." Kay pointed at the stone core that Xiaoxuan hit. Xiaoxuan dropped the stone hammer in a hurry and carried that ugly stone core to Kay and placed it onto the stone chopping block in front of Kay. "Watch closely." Kay grabbed the stone hammer that Xiaoxuan used earlier and picked up the stone core, which was 2 times wider than his hand, with one single hand. He carried the stone core tightly as he watched it closely. Xiaoxuan heard the screaming of wind and saw the shadows of the hammer. Ding! The hammer created a ringing sound as it landed on the stone core. At the same time, a stone flake was peeled away from the stone core. The flying stone flake did not hit the ground directly, instead, it fell into a wooden box hanging on the wall. The swing was fast, as if the hammer knew exactly where it should land, and which part of the stone should be peeled away. It was not like Xiaoxuan's bracing himself when he was hitting. On the contrary, it felt pretty casual and relaxed, and it handled complicated matters with ease. That was the real peeling the stone flakes, unlike Xiaoxuan earlier, who was merely hitting the stone, and most of the stone flakes he created were waste materials. After one strike, Kay did not provide too much time for Xiaoxuan to think about it. The second and third and fourth strikes soon followed. The shadows of the hammer were connected with one another and the ringing sounds became more and more dense. With quicker strikes, Xiaoxuan felt that the sounds had become a whole and he could barely distinguish the different strikes. At the same time, the stone flakes that were peeled away flew into the wood box one after another. At first look, it was like a rainbow connecting the stone core and the box. Xiaoxuan was completely stunned. He had known earlier that Kay was a skillful stoneware crafter. However, he did not realize that he still had been underestimating this old stoneware crafter. Who could imagine that he had such artificial crafting skills? This was no longer peeling away stone flakes anymore. That was making sliced noodles. Obviously, when Xiaoxuan was watching Kay's work before, he did not see his real skills. The things that he had seen earlier were barely a small part of it, and it was far from what he was really capable of. So delicate and so accurate. When Xiaoxuan came back to his senses, Kay was already finished with the peeling and the stone core left in his hand was already in the shape of a stone adze. After drilling and polishing, the tool was complete by installing a wooden handle. It was perfect. "Take it." Kay passed the completed stone adze to Xiaoxuan. "For me." Xiaoxuan took over the stone adze. When he looked up at Kay again, he found that Kay was already doing something else, so he swung a few times with the stone adze. He had helped in processing the stone adze. He felt proud even though his technique was rough and unsightly, and he almost ruined the stone core, but after all it was Xiaoxuan's first time in seriously crafting a stone tool. Also, it allowed Xiaoxuan a chance to witness the true artificial crafting skills of Kay. Of course it meant a lot to him. The stone core that made the adze was fine and smooth in its texture, thick and very hard. Although it was not obvious by just looking, one could easily feel its weight when holding it in the hand. The stone was better than average. Xiaoxuan did not expect Kay to give it to him as a gift, just like that. Peeling stone flakes is hard. When you want a satisfying result, even the simplest strike could take a lot of time to practice. There's no shortcut in this. You have to anticipate every stone flake's peeling, and then think about speed, weight, strength and consequences, and then combine them with the natural quality of the stone. The best strength and angle, along with many things that could turn a rough stone core into fine stoneware, were difficult to describe. You can only work on them by yourself. How to use your strength, which angle to use, and how to hit the stone, you may only acquire those skills by numerous times of practicing. Yes, stoneware, unlike ironware, could not be restored once the strike was made. You cannot turn back time. With one hammer strike, you could only make it or lose it. You can only set the tune with one beat of the gong. Xiao Xuan took the stone adze and respectfully gave a salute to Kay. Yes, I get it. However, Kay switched his tone and pointed at those few dead fish along with Caesar in the corner. You also need to know the importance of comprehending. You are allowed to fail, but you have to learn from your mistakes, instead of behaving like those stupid fish. Understood. Xiao Xuan knew what Kay was talking about. Kay indicated that Xiao Xuan should not be as simple-minded as those piranhas with no memory of failures. They kept making the same mistakes and they did not turn back even when they were killed. Take one fish with you, Kay said, telling Xiao Xuan to go. Okay. Since Kay told Xiao Xuan to take a fish home, Xiao Xuan would have no space to reject. So he said no more and asked Caesar to leave together, with a fish and a stone adze in his hands. Taking the fish and walking out from Key's house, Xiao Xuan recalled Key's words as he stared at the fish in his hand. He couldn't help but poke the fish's head with his stone adze. So stupid. The fish remained silent, as if saying, so it's all my fault, now. Early the next morning, Leng Ga and the others came to the orphan cave for Xiao Xuan. The timber was already prepared, and all Xiao Xuan needed to do was to name the place that he had in mind. Once the place was chosen, they would begin the building. Xiao Xuan was familiar with the mountain foot area, and based on his current condition, it would not be possible for him to build a house at Mountain Hill District. He would only bring trouble for himself. As for the place to build the house, Xiao Xuan had some place chosen in his mind long before he was awakened. Although the place was a little remote, it had a perfect view. One could see the situation up in the mountain as well as a view of Mountain Foot District. You could even see the orphan cave from there. Leng Ga and his friends were quite familiar with building wooden cabins, so only after half a day, the cabin was built. After finishing some details, one could live in it directly. Since it was Xiao Xuan's first cabin of his own, it was just a small one which took up about 40 square meters. It looked just fine, and Xiao Xuan could totally do the expanding later by himself. But for now, at least he had his own place. In general, Xiao Xuan was pretty satisfied with the cabin. Leng Ga originally planned to chop up the leftover timber into firewood, but he was stopped by Xiao Xuan. Instead, Xiao Xuan asked him to help build a simple wooden bed. Some people in the tribe preferred sleeping on stone beds, and some liked sleeping on haystacks. There were also some people that chose to build a bed with wood, and Xiao Xuan certainly was one of them. After covering it with clean and dry animal furs, it looked much more comfortable than Xiao Xuan's former haystack back in the cave. Ah Xuan. Xiao Xuan looked up at that voice and he saw the middle-aged woman called Yi. Yi had not awakened her totemic powers, so she lived in the Mountain Foot District. Normally she would do some sewing for people to earn a living. She was kind, so Xiao Xuan often approached her to make animal skin bags. Yesterday Xiao Xuan had asked Yi to sew an animal skin bag at the cost of one fish. He explained the style of the animal skin bag in detail, and supposed that it could take more than one day to finish the sewing. However, unexpectedly, Yi had come so soon. Aunt Yi, is the work done? Xiao Xuan asked with a smile. Yes. It was not that hard. Yi passed him the bag. She did not stay, for she had other work to do. Why do you need this animal skin bag? Leng Ga asked as he kept chopping the wood. For training, of course. Xiao Xuan did not explain much, but he took the animal skin bag and placed it inside the room. He had not tried it yet, so he did not know if it could be of use or not. Leng Ga and his friends had not that much of curiosity, and they continued to do the final decoration of the cabin. When it was almost done, Xiao Xuan asked Leng Ga and the others to stay for lunch. Aside from fish, there were some tubers and fruits, and some plants provided by Leng Ga and the others. The two young warriors living in the mountainside district were pretty interested in the fish. However, they did not have much time for fishing, since they needed to prepare the stoneware, do the training, and get things ready for the next hunting missions. Also, they were in no lack of food, so neither of them had gone fishing. You should each take a fish with you when you leave. I have plenty of them anyway. Xiao Xuan was not bragging, for yesterday afternoon he returned to the cave and went out with the other kids to fish by the riverside. Usually, as long as he had the time and there were no abnormal signs by the river, he would go fishing. Capturing fish was quite simple, since all the piranhas were so stupid and simple-minded. What's more, to hunt, Xiaoxuan would need his teammates' help after he joined the hunting team. Compared to the future help, a few fish were absolutely no big deal. The young warriors were a little embarrassed, but seeing that Xiaoxuan really didn't care, they accepted his offer, and thought about chopping down more timber to reinforce Xiaoxuan's cabin later. As they were eating, Ji came with a big stone crock on his shoulder. Old K asked me to deliver this to you as a gift, in celebration of having your own place. You can store food or water inside. Ji put down the stone crock and looked around the nearly completed cabin. Not bad. I plan to help here, but it seems that I can save the strength now. Xiaoxuan curled his lips at his words. Why would you come at this late hour if you really plan to help? Leng Ga and the others also figured that Ji was just saying things, but out of the respect for the old warrior, none of them had said a word about it. Hey, is this stone crock for Ashwen? Leng Ga asked something obviously apparent, just to change the subject. Yes. Old K made it for Ashwen especially. As Ji explained, he emphasized Old K and especially while looking at Xiaoxuan constantly. From Ji's understanding of Old K, the old fellow must have been very satisfied with Xiaoxuan. In the past, Old K had also planned to take in some apprentices and teach them seriously. However, it was such a shame that none of the kids were good enough. They were either too impatient or too indecisive. Some did not even dare to swing the hammer once they were dealing with some fine stone cores. Old K directly drove them away, and he never spoke to them again. Many would say that Old K was too harsh on the others. However, the fact was, he was merely too disappointed. Yet, after such a long time, K had finally found a satisfying apprentice. But he kept his poker face up all day long. If he drove Xiaoxuan away this time, how could he find a better person to inherit his skills? Even Ji felt anxious about the situation for him. In fact, the very night that Xiaoxuan had awakened, K asked Ji to find a proper big stone after the ritual ceremony was over. He worked for 2 nights and made this stone crock. This crock was almost the same size as the one that Ji used to deliver food to the orphan cave every day. However, this one was a much better workmanship. The edge of the stone crock was nearly the same thickness, and the inner side of the crock was polished very smoothly. While on the outside, not only was it polished properly, it was vividly carved with some pictures and patterns as well, including natural scenery, birds, and animals. There were some animals that Xiaoxuan had not seen before. K had probably seen them when he went out for hunting in the past. Normally, K focused more on a stoneware's practical use, and seldom decorated it with art. Now, seeing the stone crock he made for Xiaoxuan, one could understand how much he valued him. This is such a nice stone crock. Leng Ga and the others said with admiration as they surrounded the stone crock. Even though all of them valued the practical use more and a stone crock was no big deal, who wouldn't like better-looking stoneware? Not only was the stone crock large in size, with patterns carved on it, but it also had a matching stone cover. Usually, many families would cover their stone crock with animal skins, straw mats, or with a piece of stone plate. Rarely did they have a cover that especially matched the crock. Even the 2 young warriors that lived in the mountainside district had no such cover back in their homes. Indeed. What a nice crock. I have lived for all these years, yet the stone crock in my house is not as good as this one. Ji added. This K you're talking about, is he the one who used to be famous for setting traps? Aang asked. He had come to Xiaoxuan's place with Leng Ga. Yes, that's the one. Leng Ga nodded. I heard that many people used to learn the crafting skills from K, but later on, Aang did not finish his story. Later on what? Later on, all apprentices that followed K for his skills were either pushed away by his bad temper or were driven away by force from him. Gradually, no one approached him to learn anymore, and K moved down to the Mountain Foot district, where he now lives. K was indeed very famous in the tribe, but now he was rarely spoken of by others. Old K is very skillful. He is harsh, but you can learn useful stuff from him. Ji told Xiaoxuan seriously, which was quite rare. Oh, are you learning from K now, Ashwen? Hang in there. K really was awesome back in his day. Leng Ga, in order to encourage Xiaoxuan, shared his own story of when he was learning to set ground bows from his grandfather. Back then, his grandfather rained down curses on his head like hell. Not only was he being yelled at, but he also got beaten up sometimes. Leng Ga's grandfather was an excellent warrior, and Leng Ga could never escape from his grandfather's hands. Other kids would mock him every time they saw him get beat up. At that time Leng Ga felt very ashamed of himself, and secretly blamed his grandfather for everything. However, as time went by and Leng Ga became a real warrior, he finally realized his grandfather's care and thought. When they were hunting in the forest, ground bows were not considered as direct killing weapons, however, they were critical to the mission as well. Just because of the fact that Lang Ga was quite skillful in setting ground traps, he was quickly accepted by the hunting team. And every time when food was distributed, Lang Ga would get quite a big part of it. At least he was getting more food than the others with a similar level. Mastering more skills means that you will have a smoother road than the others. It's not only about your position within a hunting team. If I may say some unlucky words, once you get wounded and lose an arm or a leg, like old K and me, you will no longer be able to join any hunting missions in the future. With more skills, you can live an easier life in the tribe and keep yourself away from starvation," said Ji. So Lang Ga and Ji both agreed on the theory that you should keep it going even when being yelled at like hell. You should grasp the opportunity and try to learn as much as possible. It's best to absorb all your master's skills. Not to mention that K had a lot of good stuff to teach. There was so much to learn. At their words, Xiaoxuan nodded solemnly. I know what you are talking about. When you want to learn things from someone, you must acquire many qualities, and having no sense of shame must be the most important quality of yours. Lang Ga and Ji both couldn't agree more, exactly. Of course Xiaoxuan would like to learn old Key's skills, not only his skills in stone crafting, but also his skills in setting up traps, which were quite useful when hunting outside. It was just too early for him, who had no foundation in training. What Xiaoxuan could do now was start with simple striking and prepare to learn more advanced skills later on. In fact, Xiaoxuan understood old Key's attitude towards him. A long time ago, old K had started to help him, however, sometimes old K said something that could easily be misunderstood by others. Take yesterday for example, when he approached old K to learn crafting skills, he merely got an evaluation of waste after he peeled off the stone flakes. Others would have misunderstood old K if they did not know him as well as Xiaoxuan did. Luckily, Xiaoxuan had a quick mind and knew what old K was referring to after some thinking. Seeing that Xiaoxuan had no rejection to their theories, Ji was relieved immediately. When he left, he planned to drop by old Key's place to brag about his deeds, and perhaps get something as a reward from old K. After finishing helping Xiaoxuan with his cabin, Lang Ga and the others left, for they had a lot of preparations that needed to be completed before the hunt. After all, the first hunting mission of the year was just around the corner and, as was the same for every hunting mission, warriors had to risk their lives. Preparations were the only guarantee for their safe return. There were 2 hunting groups in the tribe, and they took turns going out for hunting missions. While one group was out, the other would be on duty rotations within the tribe and maintaining the security of the tribe. After all, there were still so many ferocious beasts in the mountains and just as many sick or elderly people in the tribe. Among every hunting group, there were 2 hunting teams. According to Lang Ga's description, warriors were distributed into 2 hunting teams based on their personal abilities. The first hunting team was formed by warriors living in the mountainside district and above, and the second was formed by warriors that lived in the mountainside district and below. Lang Ga and his friends belonged to the second hunting team, and naturally, Xiaoxuan would join them when he goes out for hunting missions. After Lang Ga and the others had left, Xiaoxuan took a look at the newly built cabin. Caesar was wandering around the cabin curiously. "I'll toss you out if you dare to poop inside," said Xiaoxuan. When they lived back in the cave, Xiaoxuan had trained Caesar to go pooping at the special place where all the kids did their pooping. Here, Caesar had to strictly go outside to excrete his waste. "In the future we'll be living here. We'll make a wooden desk and chairs and stools, and..." After lying down on the bed for a rest, Xiaoxuan took out the animal skin bag that Yi had delivered this morning. He then went out and filled it with some sand and crushed stones, before weighing it with his hands. Xiaoxuan used the heavy smashed stones, tossed away after crafting stoneware, as the gravel to fill his bag. There were a lot that were thrown away at the gravel place, piled up like small hills. The stones were not suitable or attractive to stoneworms, so stoneworms were rarely found there. Hence, not many people would go there either. Xiaoxuan had thought about that place when Lang Ga was talking about load training. So he asked someone to sew him the animal skin bag in a special shape. It weighed about 100 kilo when filled up with the smashed stones. Xiaoxuan had once wondered if those stones were metal or. However, after serious observation, he realized that the stones were just like other stones in the gravel yard, except for the fact that they weighed more. Of course, Xiaoxuan wanted to have some ironware, however, not only did he know nothing about forging and puddling, he also had a bigger, more important issue. In this world, there were many things that differed from his last life, including the strange stones, so he could not judge things the same way he used to. Because of that, instead of spending time researching, Xiaoxuan preferred to deal with the problems he had at hand and decided to forget about forging and ironware for now. He tied a few animal skin bags onto his arms and legs and, after he was all set, moved a little. He found that he was still quite agile and could carry another stone. It seemed that the body strength of a totemic warrior was really good. So, he began to combine the load training with his daily life. Even though for now, Xiaoxuan could not carry a 1,000-kilogram thing like Ji, he could lift a few hundred kilos easily. If Xiaoxuan were still in his last life, he never could have dreamt about this kind of strength. As Xiaoxuan was trying out the animal skin bag, he noticed that Caesar was facing the outside and baring his teeth. Xiaoxuan untied and put down the animal skin bags. As soon as he finished doing so, he heard someone calling his name. Is Xuan around? The people coming were two tall and strong warriors, who seemed young, around the same age as Lang Ga. Muscles covered their bodies and their voices were rough, with a heroic sense. My name is Tuo, and this is Kiki. The shaman asked me to bring you something, said Tuo. Tuo was obviously more mature than Lang Ga, and although he sized up Xiaoxuan with his eyes, he had no intention of harming him. There were even traces of a faint smile on his face. The shaman kept his promise that, on the very first day of Xiaoxuan having his own place, he would have someone bring up food as compensation for him. There was a lot of meat, all of it had been processed, and some of it was already preserved. Along with the meat, there were some tubers, plants, and fresh fruits. Besides food, there were 2 packs of mixed herbs. Xiaoxuan was familiar with one of them. They were used for normal diseases, since he used them back in the caves and knew how to apply them. The other pack of herbs, as Tuo explained, were used for traumatic bleeding. As for the other person that came, Xiaoxuan figured that he was someone restless judging from his name. Also, Tuo said that the shaman asked him to bring up something. He mentioned me instead of us. So apparently Kiki was not here under the shaman's command. Kiki had been staring at Caesar from the minute he entered the room. Since he was facing Xiaoxuan with his back, Xiaoxuan could not see the expression on his face. However, according to Caesar's reaction, Kiki could not be looking very friendly towards him. Warriors who had been hunting forever would see any animal as game and would gladly pierce them through with a spear. Caesar's body tensed up, nearly baring his teeth, preparing to fight. Hey! A wolf can actually develop like this, said Kiki. Just when Xiaoxuan was wondering whether the warrior was despising Caesar for being so timid and not ferocious like wolves in the wild, Xiaoxuan heard Kiki smack his lips while saying, "It's worthy to be eaten after another half a year." Caesar bared his 4 sharp teeth towards the warrior immediately. He looked quite alarmed, and growling sounds could be heard in his throat. He was sending a warning, as if he would rush towards him to bite the next second. Okay. The warrior took out a stone knife he had at his wrist, and said with enthusiasm. Tuo was explaining the usage of the mixed herbs as he heard Kiki. The muscles on his face froze for a second, and then twitched twice heavily. He immediately dropped the things and rushed towards Kiki like a gust of wind. He punched Kiki as he was standing off against Caesar with his stone knife. Fuck you. Put your knife away. Kiki got punched and flew out the window directly. With a loud bang, he fell on the ground outside. Xiaoxuan was totally speechless. Indeed, the totemic warriors acted simple and crude. After that, Tuo returned to Xiaoxuan and explained, he's just like that. Every time he sees a beast, he would lose his mind out of excitement. Don't worry, he was just acting out of habit. Trust me, he did not mean it. After all, they dared not to kill a wolf with a pattern plate from the shaman. However, just when he finished his sentence, Kiki came inside again as if nothing happened and he had not been punched in the face. This time, he walked toward Caesar again without a knife. However, he rubbed his fingers and obviously he had no good intention as well. Tuo was running out of options. When the shaman asked him to deliver something here, he did not expect to meet Kiki on the way. Once Kiki heard that Tuo was going to the newly awakened totemic warrior that surprised everyone during the ritual ceremony, he immediately got excited and insisted to tag along. At first Tuo wanted to chat more with this little warrior that was so valued by the shaman. However, based on the current circumstances, Tuo regretted for letting Kiki to tag along. Perhaps he would fight the wolf for real if they stayed. Such a young wolf would be easily killed by Kek's single punch. What if Kiki killed the wolf? They would be yelled at by the shaman. Xiaoxuan sensed a shadow flash in front of him, and the next second, he saw Tuo appeared behind Kiki. He grabbed Kek's head with his arms as he dragged him out. In the meantime, Tuo looked back at Xiaoxuan. We'll leave since the thing is already delivered. We'll have plenty of time for chatting when you go for hunting missions with us in the future. After they had left, Caesar relaxed, too. He sniffed around and began to drag an animal bag out. It was the one brought in by Kiki. It looked like Caesar wanted to toss it out. Xiao Xuan hurriedly stopped him. Because inside the bag there were some dried fruits. Xiao Xuan had not tried many of them. So it would be a big waste if Caesar just threw it out. As Xiao Xuan was sorting things out, he recalled Tuo's words earlier. The last sentence meant that they were in the same hunting groups as Xiao Xuan. However, Leng Ga had never spoken of these two people while they talked. Were they from the first team? Early the next morning, Xiao Xuan tied those animal skin bags, filled with gravel, to himself and headed to the training ground with Caesar. In the past, when Xiao Xuan had not awakened yet, he would often feel worried about being hurt, or even being killed by mistake if he did not pay enough attention to the surroundings. Now he was much more emboldened because his body could endure more damage or wounds. People in the tribe did not know many moves or forms. All they could do was imagine the existence of a certain game and react based on its habits. Some warrior would just treat the cliff as some kind of animal, and then hit the cliff hard and strong. Because of that, one should not be surprised when seeing a gust of wind carrying sand and stones in the mountain. That was merely some warrior practicing his punches. Just like Xiao Xuan saw at the shaman's place the other night, kids like Mao could break normal stone plates. After Xiao Xuan arrived at the training ground, he picked out a mountain and began to run from the mountain foot to the top with stones carried on his shoulder. While running, he could see which part of the mountain consisted of fine stones, so that he could go dig or carve them out. Fortunately, I have such a special ability, Xiao Xuan said as he saw the different shades of gray in his sight. Compared with totemic power, the other ability in his body had no doubt helped him save a lot more time and effort. Xiao Xuan could not punch out mid-level or mid-upper level stones. His hands would be the ones hurting if he punched the stones with his bare hands. After carving out the stone he had chosen, Xiao Xuan looked up in the sky and realized it was almost noon. Xiao Xuan carried the stone and headed back. He ate lunch back in his place, and then headed for Old Key's house with the stone he carved out in the morning. Xiao Xuan had arranged every afternoon for learning stone crafting. The stoneware might look simple, but it was more than just hitting on them. First of all, you need to know how to identify the different qualities of the stones. Even with the same hardness, the way of striking could be different when it comes to different stone cores. Old K said as he took out 2 stone cores of the same grade. Xiao Xuan saw that Old K directly carved off stone flakes from one stone core, while he processed another with heat and cold. Old K explained the changes of color and the cooling time of quite a few different kinds of stones to Xiao Xuan in detail. Some stones would change their color and quality after being heated up, while some stones would only change the quality. Some of the stones would not have any reaction during the process of heating. Sometimes temperature must be strictly controlled when heating up stones. One needed to know when was the best time for carving and at what temperature the carving wasn't suitable. As for the temperature, one could only rely on their feelings and experiences, since there was no sophisticated instrument that could be used for measuring. For instance, Old K could tell which stone core was hotter with a single touch, when the difference seemed to be undetectable for Xiao Xuan. Different stones had different reactions on temperature, so they have to be heated up with different periods of time. Also, the cooling times and their reactions all varied. Old K took one of the 2 stone cores earlier and started to heat it up above the fire. He held a stone stick in each hand and used the sticks to hold the stone core in the middle. The fire burned strongly as if it was trying to dry the surrounding people. One would be sweaty after just a short time by the fire. On Old Key's face there were lots of sweat stains, but his hands were quite steady, and he was quick and nimble when he turned the stone core. About half an hour later, the stone core above the fire turned from pale gray to brownish red. Then Old K took it away from fire. However, he did not start the carving right away, but waited until it cooled down so that the brownish red faded to some extent. The stone flakes that were carved away were in almost the same thickness, regardless of their shape. What kind of crafting ability could achieve that? At least in the conception of Xiao Xuan from his former life, that could not be realized without advanced cutting machine. The so-called ideal crafting was an extremely complicated process, and people who did not follow this path would never be able to imagine it. Practice came right after the theory. Xiao Xuan had been practicing carving off stone flakes for most of the afternoon. There's so much waste. Do it again. What the hell are you carving off? Do it again. Bad control on your strength as you swing the hammer. Do it again. Hold it. Who taught you to carve this kind of stone directly? Have you had too much fish? Heat it up before you do it again. Old Key's neighbors all realized that recently Old K became more hot-tempered. They all sighed and shook their heads when they talked about Xiaoxuan, such a poor boy, Xuan. In fact, the situation inside the room was not as miserable as people imagined. Old K had a vicious mouth, but he was very patient when teaching Xiaoxuan his skills. Also, he was never stingy with stone cores. For a single afternoon, Xiaoxuan had used 5 stone cores. Aside from the one that he brought, the other 4 all came from Old Key's own stash. They were all of fine quality, so Xiaoxuan even felt a little extravagant that he used such fine stones for practicing. Although Old K didn't mind it, but Xiaoxuan himself felt a little ashamed. Every day when he returned from Old Key's place to his own cabin, Xiaoxuan would feel sourness and stabbing pain all over his body. The pain in his muscles grew more and more intense, and it was hard for him just to set up a stone pot and light the fire. Especially the part between his thumb and index finger hurt even more with burning pain. He tried a few times before he could successfully set up the pot. Something good must be thoroughly tempered. Xiaoxuan felt that it was not the stone cores that got hammered, but himself. However, at night he slept safe and sound. And after a night's recover, he would feel refreshed in the morning, as if the pain in the muscles was nothing but an illusion. He did not know whether it was because of the totemic power or because of the other ability in his body. Early the next morning, Xiaoxuan planned to go to the training ground like normal. Yesterday he had found a place where there were quite a few fine stones. He could carve some stone cores out for practicing, so that Old K could save his own. He would hate to waste too many of Old Key's stones. As he was walking, Xiaoxuan realized that there was something irregular. People were not so active normally, but this morning, almost all of them got up early, and they were moving in the same direction. After thinking for a bit, Xiaoxuan suddenly tapped on his forehead. He almost forgot that today was the day that Lang Ga and the others went out for the hunting mission. Xiaoxuan changed his direction and joined the stream of people together with Caesar. There was a path from the mountain foot to the mountaintop, which was almost a straight-up path. It was higher than the other places in the surroundings and no one would build a house there. Hunting teams would walk on that path when they took off, as well as when they returned, so they would not interfere the other residents of the tribe. As time went by, the path was given another special meaning. People in the tribe called it the Path of Glory. The tribesmen had complicated emotions as if they were seeing troops off before they went to war. Pride, gloom, and hope. They did now know whether their families would remain intact when the hunting team returned. They did not know whether their families would bring back enough food when the hunting team returned. Most of the people gathering along the Path of Glory were relatives of the warriors that were going on the mission. And they varied from kids to elderly. When the hunting team returns, the same people would gather here again to greet them back. Of course they would have different feelings that time. However, aside from seeing off and welcoming back the hunting teams, to those warriors in the hunting team there was another meaning for this path. That was a confirmation and acknowledgement of their personal strength. If Xiaoxuan could summarize based on his understanding, the path would be a pride road to many of the warriors. After the end of a hunting mission, it was absolutely clear who gets how much food. It was like an open chart for one's possessions. The wealthy people would have no lack of reputation, status and women. Those were all worthy of flaunting. Here they come. Someone shouted out. Xiaoxuan looked at that direction. There were about 200 people walking down the mountain. At the very front was the leader of the hunting team that Xiaoxuan recognized from the ritual ceremony that night. Not only the leader, Xiaoxuan had seen the ones following him before. They were dancing by the fire pit. All people walking down the mountain had a feeling of generals at war, regardless of their expressions. Some were smiling and some were quite serious. At the rear of the team among all tall and strong warriors, those few kids with limited height were pretty obvious and easily noticed. The chief's first grandson, Mao, was also among them. Fei, who had showed off his ability in front of Xiaoxuan, was also in the team. Hey, who are those kids? They surely are strong and skillful since they can go on the first hunting mission. Those are the top warriors from the newly awakened warriors this year. Hey, is that Mao? He deserves to be the first grandson of our chief. People were discussing heatedly. Sei's father pointed out Fei and other kids in the troops and said to Sai, "Look for yourself. You are almost the same age, and you awakened with them in the same year. Now they are in the first hunting mission already, and you? Where are you now?" Sai apparently was not convinced by his father's judgment. "I can do the same if you lived up in the mountain." Sei's father immediately was speechless, and he slapped his son's face without any more words. People in the tribe resumed the usual pace of life after the hunting team had left. However, compared to last year, it was quite different with the bustling by the riverside. After experiencing the initial fear of the unknown creatures in the river, people began to tend to be less afraid of water creatures because of the benefits brought by the big-mouthed piranhas. It turned out that the creatures in the river were not so dreadful. One could capture enough food as long as one stayed careful. Kids in the orphan cave lived a stable life under the management of Tu and Ba. Every day they would go fishing, and with the food provided by the tribe, had grown much stronger than before. They also became more and more united as time went by. They had to be united, for each and every single person's capacity was limited after all, so they had to act as a unit in order to be dominant when fishing. As for stoneworms, Xiaoxuan would take Caesar to dig some up every 2 days, after which he asked the kids in the orphan cave to store them for later use. However, stones could never trap stoneworms. Someone had tried to store stoneworms within a stone jar, only to discover the jar broken and the stone worm gone the next day. However, Tu made an important discovery from this accident. Wooden jars and straw ropes could trap the worms better than stoneware. Even though the stone worms could not be kept for a long time, they could definitely be trapped for 1 or 2 days, preventing Xiaoxuan from having to go to the orphan cave every day. It soon became routine for Xiaoxuan to search for stone cores at the training ground in the mornings, and, in the afternoons, go to Old Key's place to learn crafting skills. Over 10 days passed, and Xiaoxuan felt that he had much more strength than when he had newly awakened. He became more skilled in controlling his totemic power, and could switch the 2 kinds of powers inside him more freely. It seemed that learning stone crafting skills had many benefits to mastering totemic power. Xiaoxuan went through the woods like a nimble monkey, heading towards the place he had chosen yesterday. As his figure went by, the branches shook slightly, as if blown by a slight breeze. Caesar ran behind him. Being still within the range of the area guarded by warriors from the tribe, Xiaoxuan did not worry about the presence of some ferocious beasts, yet controlled his sound on purpose in preparation of future hunting missions. On many occasions, warriors were required to move in silence as they had to approach the game quietly and hide their presence. A slightly larger noise could easily disturb the beast they were after, or draw some other fierce beast's attention. Xiaoxuan had seen Lang Ga and Mai move in silence and knew that both of them, especially Mai, could move without a single sound. He still had a long way to go compared to them. In the several mountains of the training grounds, Xiaoxuan saw many newly awakened kids like himself, including Sai. "Hey, is that Xuan?" Sai's father questioned, watching the figure flash by. For normal people, Xiaoxuan was very fast and hard to see, but for an experienced warrior who had been awakened for a long time, he could be spotted easily. Sai was constantly jumping with a giant stone in his hands and had jumped over 100 times already. By the time he looked in the direction his father was looking, Xiaoxuan had already disappeared. "What are you looking at? Continue jumping." Sai's father hit him on the butt with a stone stick and yelled, "You are worse than Xuan, who is 2 years younger than you." "Why do you say that?" Sai was obviously not convinced. "Hey, how dare you talk back at me? It's what I say it is. Now continue to jump and you may only rest when you've jumped 200 times. Sai's father hit him twice more with the stick as he spoke. "I'm already at 172. Sai had calculated in his mind and knew he only had to jump another 28 times. He was happy about that and wondered whether to hunt for flying stone squirrels, or to find some snacks. He wondered whether he could still find that green fruit that tasted crispy the other day. Sai swallowed his saliva as he thought, but suddenly he heard his father shout again, "Do you take me for a fool who could never calculate correctly? You've only done 127. You have to jump another 73 times. Sai was so angry that he nearly tossed that giant stone away. However, his father was like that. He was never wrong, so Sai had to admit defeat no matter what. He would get beaten up by his father if he argued. FCK. Sai could not blame his dad, so he blamed Xiaoxuan instead, planning to vent his anger later. Xiaoxuan, on the other hand, was not aware that he was hated again, and kept looking for fine stones as usual. There were a lot of stones in the training grounds, but those that could be used to craft into stoneware were quite rare. Even when he relied on his special ability to sort out different levels of stones, it still took him a lot of time to find acceptable ones. This was because sometimes, even fine stones might not be suitable for carving. Every morning, Xiaoxuan would spend a few hours selecting stones, after which he would take back those which had fine quality and were suitable for carving. After these days of learning from Old K, Xiaoxuan had made big progress in identifying different stones. He no longer saw all the stones at the same level as he had in the past. When Xiaoxuan was looking for stone cores, Caesar would dig holes in the mountain or catch flying stone squirrels out of boredom. So every time Xiaoxuan finished selecting stone cores, he would find a few dead flying stone squirrels lying beside Caesar's feet. Sometimes, Xiaoxuan would feel sorry for Caesar. He was a wolf, yet he was kept by Xiaoxuan in that way. In the afternoon, Xiaoxuan went to Old Kei's place with the selected stone cores. Old Kei taught Xiaoxuan how to determine the best striking angles and striking surfaces of a stone, and which kind of stone was suitable for being crafted into which kind of stoneware. Then Old Kei watched as Xiaoxuan carved off stone flakes while he sat beside him. Xiaoxuan took a hammer and started striking and carving after he took off his animal skin jacket and became topless. For the first few days, Xiaoxuan's animal skin jacket was soaked in sweat after he finished striking. Water would come out with just a little twist. So later on, Xiaoxuan would take off his jacket and put it aside when he was working, so that it didn't get smelly. Ding. 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 Every afternoon, striking sounds like that would appear in Old Kei's house. 1 strike, 2 strikes, 50, 51, 100, 500. Xiaoxuan kept on striking the stone cores restlessly, as if he knew nothing about fatigue. A large stone core gradually became smaller as tiny stone flakes dropped down. The stone flakes became thinner and thinner then as time went on. After finishing the striking of 1 stone core, Xiaoxuan grabbed the second and the third without taking a break. After the third one was finished, Xiaoxuan looked like a drowned victim who had just been fished out by others. After taking a drink, Xiaoxuan stood aside so that Old Kei could elaborate on the details that needed to be paid attention to when he refined them later. He showed Xiaoxuan how to refine stone flakes in different shapes, and how to refine the remaining stone core. Old Kei said that every stone had its own story, and even the most excellent stoneware crafter might not be able to understand all stone stories. However, every time Old Kei was teaching, he tried to explain all the knowledge that he had mastered up to now with Xiaoxuan. Xiaoxuan listened with all his attention, for some words seemed unimportant, but contained much knowledge hidden within. After a short break and having finished listening to Old Kei's lecture, Xiaoxuan continued to work. However, this time he stopped striking, and instead started refining. In order to meet Old Kei's high standard, Xiaoxuan had to focus more during the process, and had to be more precise in controlling his totemic power. That was not something easy. When refining, Xiaoxuan was fully concentrated on the stone. And, despite the obvious soreness and aching, it wasn't until the refining was done and Xiaoxuan had regained awareness, that he felt a wave of pain in his head. Sometimes he even felt a sensation as if he were hit by an awl, and sweat drops constantly oozed like beams from his forehead. Old Kei said that it was normal and that he went through all those processes when he was a young apprentice. Although tired, Xiaoxuan's progress was obvious since he had more precise control of his totemic power. Old Kei showed traces of satisfaction in his eyes as he sat aside. Xiaoxuan's progress went beyond his expectations. For all those years, Old Kei had known many people who tried to learn stone crafting, yet none of them could achieve Xiaoxuan's progress. For many people, they might spend 1 or 2 years of learning without having Xiaoxuan's skills. Of course, there were some talented fellows. For example, Leng Ge used less than 50 days to learn back then, and Leng Ge's grandfather had bragged about that in front of Old Kei. But, how long had Xiaoxuan been learning? Merely 10 days. In fact, Old Kei would love to go up the mountain immediately and have a nice chat with that old man who made ground bows. However, he needed to wait a little longer, just a little longer. As he was thinking about what facial expression the old guy might have when he learnt about Xiaoxuan, Kei's sight froze for a moment. He opened his eyes wide as if he saw something inconceivable. Totemic patterns were revealed on Xiaoxuan's body, which was not strange during this time as Xiaoxuan would use his totemic power when striking and crafting. Naturally, when the totemic power was used, totemic patterns would show up. What astonished Old Kei was not the totemic pattern. What he saw was even more inconceivable than when he saw Xiaoxuan use totemic power while striking stones. As was known to all people in the tribe, the newly awakened warrior's totemic pattern would only cover their whole body when they were just awakened by the fire pit. After the ritual ceremony, all their totemic patterns would shrink. The totemic patterns that covered the entire arm would shrink to the upper arm, slightly past one shoulder, and the totemic patterns on the legs would also shrink to above the knee. Because of this, when new totemic warriors used their totemic power, the patterns that showed up wouldn't extend to one's elbows and knees, identifying them as a primary warrior. When someday, one's totemic pattern extends over his elbows and knees, it means that he is no longer a primary warrior and has become a mid-level warrior. This was the most efficient and most direct way to tell a totemic warrior's level. Totemic patterns would only extend when warriors faced numerous risks and threats by ferocious beasts in hunting missions and had significant breakthroughs. Also, the extension of totemic patterns was quite limited. Some warriors, with over 10 years of hunting experience, may not have totemic patterns that extended over their elbows and knees. So it meant that they were still merely primary warriors, and the progress was rather slow. But, how could the totemic patterns in Xiao Xuan's body be explained? Old Key's eyelids beat like hell, for he clearly remembered that the totemic patterns on Xiao Xuan's upper arm were at the same length as other newly awakened warriors when he first came by to learn stonecrafting. They were slightly past his shoulder. However, now the totemic patterns on Xiao Xuan's upper arm had extended forward about the length of a finger. In the past, Old K had never paid attention to the totemic patterns on Xiao Xuan's arm, and had only glimpsed at them because he wondered when Xiao Xuan would become a mid-level totemic warrior. He had never expected such a discovery. Since Old K could easily tell the slight difference in stoneware, how could he not notice the extension of the totemic patterns on Xiao Xuan's arm? Do not underestimate the length of a finger. Others might not be able to achieve that in years. But how long had Xiao Xuan been awakened? Based on that speed, how long would it take for him to become a mid-level totemic warrior? Old K felt that his eyelids beat even more heavily. Like and subscribe.